Good morning, everybody. It's Michael Davis from Roxhill Media here, and welcome to another of our webinars with senior business journalists telling us about how the crisis has impacted their publications and how they see the crisis also impacting the wider news agenda. And delighted to be joined this morning by Matthew Garrahan, the news editor of the Financial Times. Matthew, good morning.
Morning.
And we can see you're one of our few guests who are not working from home.
Yes, I'm in our newsroom. So we have a few people here today. Actually, it's usually pretty deserted. Most people are still remote. So this is a working newsroom. So if someone comes and taps me on the shoulder, I apologise in advance. I've told most of them that I'll be doing this.
Well, people will be keeping a beady eye out to see whether the person who taps them on the shoulder is holding their press release. But
exactly.
But before we go on to talk a little bit about how the crisis has impacted.
Sorry, I lost you there.
No, I'm back. I had a nice little sign come up. If you haven't joined us on one of these sessions before, there is a chat room on the right. If you have got a question, please flag it up in the chat room. I will try and sew it into the conversation, and maybe we will address any other ones at the end if we've got some time. But Matthew, there you are in the newsroom. It's pretty empty, presumably, but it's been as empty as that since the beginning of the crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody else in the city, we sort of emptied out, I think, in the week before lockdown was official, and we're completely empty from then. I kept coming in, so I've been coming in all the way through lockdown and beyond. A handful of colleagues have joined me, but most our reporters are all pretty much remote, although some have started to come back. The desks that we operate here, the company's desk and the tech desk and the markets desk, world news, UK news, they're all, they were all out too, and they've been coming back sporadically. But it's a largely empty building, so the newspaper and the website have been produced pretty much remotely since lockdown started, which was challenging, but we've done pretty well.
And you were newly minted into your role as news editor, so there's a quick learning curve before the crisis hit. Just tell us a little bit about those months and how the FT's sort of had to change to cope with producing a website and a paper under these.
Yeah. So I mean, the news. It's everyone warned me before I took this job that it would be hectic and sort of seat of the pants, and so it proved. I mean, I took over from Peter Spiegel, who some of you will know, February, March time of last year, and straight into sort of Brexit and straight into political crisis. And then, we had the prorogation and the election in December, the hard Brexit date. And then in the ongoing sort of Trump turmoil and turbulence in the US, and then the pandemic hit, and we had to do things slightly differently. So as I was getting my arms around the job, then suddenly I'm left with an empty newsroom and reporters who were sort of scattered around the country and around the world. And we had this story which was evolving in a rapid and in unexpected ways. And we weren't really set up to deal with it, so we had to change things on the fly so that we could keep on the news, and made some adjustments to our teams and our desks. We created a new sort of virtual reporting team for the pandemic with a single editor, because we found that we were getting stories on testing and vaccines and spiking infection numbers and lockdowns in various countries, and they were all kind of coming into, hitting all desks at different times. We needed one focal point, so I commandeered a colleague on the news desk, Barney Jobson, who's my deputy, to be the sort of focal point for all of that. So he started corralling all of that. And there were other things we had to do as well, because the avalanche of news in the markets and sort of the geopolitical stuff was so intense that we needed a proper outlet for it, because it was changing at such a rapid clip. So we launched a daily blog, which has been sort of massively successful. All reporters from around the FT have been filing, from their countries or their beats on how the virus has affected industries and sectors, and also particular economies. So that's done really well as well. We've tinkered with our subscription model, so we make one or two stories free to read every day as a sort of public service, which has done really well as well. And we've done other things with our interactive team. I think most of you will know the coronavirus tracker page that we launched, which was cited by everybody. It's been the most popular piece of FT journalism we've ever produced, showing the sort of spike in cases around the world and the flattening in countries that were controlling the surges there.
A very good US election tracker as well.
And we've got that too, and that's sort of killing it in the traffic as well. So it's been we've had to move quickly and nimbly, which has been difficult because without people being around. But we've kept in touch on Google Hangouts and on Slack, which is a good tool, as I think lots of organizations have. But just as a news organization, having to sort of all this stuff kind of flooding in, it's been a real challenge to deal with. But we're getting there, I think.
Well, it's interesting how you've tweaked some of your operations, but perhaps it might sort of help illustrate some of the challenges that you face. If you just give us a little insight into 24 hours in the operation of the news desk at the FT, please.
So we have we're sort of staffed here in London pretty early on from 7 a.m. or rather virtually. We have colleagues on the news desk start at 7 and work through till 3 o'clock. I come in around 8:30. We have a call at 8:30 with desk heads to sort of get a sort of 15-minute call to get a sense of the biggest stories of the day. And on that call, we'll have the world news editor and Andrew Parker, who's the UK news editor, Tom Braithwaite, who some of you will know, who's a company's editor. And we'll I'll get the sort of top 2 or 3 stories so we can think about the formulation of the homepage and how we're going to put it together and what's on the diary that day, what's coming in. Then at 10 we have a meeting with our morning editorial conference meeting with Rula Khalaf, who's I should have mentioned in January took over as editor from Lionel Barber after a 14-year stint. And then we get on with it, and it's there'll be political news, there'll be earnings news from the off at 7 o'clock. The US starts waking up around 11 and 12. We have 2 different homepages, a UK homepage and an international homepage, and we can set the international homepage up for the US morning, because we find that there's most of our traffic is in the mornings of our big centers. So that's UK and continental Europe and the US. And then during the day, we're thinking about the next morning stories. So we have what's called a broadcast schedule, and every night and an afternoon editorial conference, we put together our lists for the next morning, with our scoops for the next morning kind of rush, because most people are reading first thing in the morning, and if they're in the UK and likewise in the US. And that's when in the old days, I think we talked about this yesterday, Michael, but it's a big departure from the days of sort of just classic print media. Forgive me if I ramble on here too much, but 20 years ago when I started out in this business, you work towards basically the end of the day print deadline at 6 or 7 o'clock, with a second edition deadline at 11 o'clock. And that was it. You kind of work towards, so that the day kind of built to this crescendo when you had to get your copy in and written and edited, so it could be put in the paper, sent off to the printers. Obviously now we have, when we have a big story, we put it up straight away, but we still try and think about that peak for the morning, because that's when most people are picking up their phone or their tablet or logging on to see what's happening. So the organization is engineered around that, around getting, hitting those peak traffic points, because that's when most of our readers are joining us.
A lot to digest there.
Yes.
Just go into the nitty gritty of some of the details. Your 10 o'clock conference, that's been put back half an hour from what was the original 9:30 time in peacetime.
Yeah, in peacetime, I guess war footing, and because there was, it's just working better at the moment because we can get it. We're getting into it a little bit in my pre-conference call, so we can set things up then, and then lay out a spread for the editor in terms of what we've got, what's coming up.
And so you go into that with story lists.
Yeah. So each desk, so the company's desk, the tech desk, the UK desk, will all have a list of their stories for and with a sense of when these stories will be ready. So what's happening in the working day, and also what will be pitched for the next morning's 5 a.m. broadcast sort of pump out.
Exactly. And interesting that you talk about this new broadcast schedule, which is the focus of so much of your attention. What goes in the newspaper is just pulled out of that.
Yeah, I mean that's that's the way it's supposed to work. Yeah, I mean by the end of the day, we have a separate print team which basically can pull out the best stories that we've got, and slot them into the newspaper. And by the end of the day, as print deadlines approach, they have a good idea about what's going to go on the front because they'll know what's percolated during the day, and we're obviously in close contact with them. They're all part of the news desk as well.
Yeah, and you've seen some sort of changes to the pattern of readership during lockdown. What are the peaks that you're trying to meet in demand?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, given what I just said, I mean, what I think what underpins this whole industry is the strength of the stories, right? And how good the stories are. And the bottom line really is that if you've got a good story, it doesn't matter when you put it out because people will read it. Yeah. So there are stories that on a spectrum which will run from good and interesting to absolute crackers, knockouts. And you want to maximize the readership as much as you can. What we found since the pandemic started is that there's more consumption in evenings in the UK. So we've tried to freshen up the homepage around 5 o'clock. It's freshened up continuously during the day, but we have, as I don't know how familiar all of you are with the homepage of the website, there's the splash slot, which is obviously our big news story for at that particular moment, and the standalone, which is the secondary piece, which is usually a big feature or a big piece of analysis. And we often have in the standalone slot have a big feature which will be there for several hours. We're trying to refresh that more in the afternoons because we've noticed a real uptick. And if we have a big scoop, we can often put it up in the evening too, particularly if it's a big political scoop, because the interest has been so intense, and there's an unfolding political crisis, which we've all been reporting on, and there's always an audience for it.
Yeah, it sounds as though you are doing more of those long read, featurey type pieces, and presumably it's because that's what people have got time to read those at the moment.
Well, it's a mix. I mean, you often get reporters who want to sort of give you their sort of perfect long form prose, which is great, and when it works, it works. But I mean, as a news editor, what I want is news, right? And I want things which can bring people to the site. Longer, more considered pieces with our reporters have spent proper amount of time on will do well if we put them in the right slots and which kind of resonate. So it's a mix. It depends on what's happening that day, and it depends on the news flow of any particular day. The other thing I should say as well is what we've discovered quite recently too is that there's a huge audience for new material on Saturdays online, and we used to think of that as a sort of dead zone where we just we put up weekendy style pieces, which we still do, but we also there's an audience for news, and if we've got a big scoop, we've experimented with putting a scoop up Saturday morning and on Saturday afternoon, and same on Sunday morning. And again, the Sunday newspapers will have their again, from my 20 years ago, you try and get your story in on Saturday in the Saturday print edition to scoop the Sundays. now we can put it up online on a Saturday morning, or Saturday afternoon even, to scoop the Sundays, which we do regularly. So it's there's an audience. I think just to take a step back, what the pandemic and these particular times show us is that there is an audience for good, strong journalism and good material. It's always there.
Are there any stats you could give us about your latest audience figures?
Yes, let me turn to my crib sheet now. I do have some stats. Just give me 1 second. I mean, we have we've got I think digital subscriptions up 12% in the first 6 months of 2020 on the same time last year. Trial subscriptions doubled. Our traffic went through the roof. I mean, the previous sort of record was the summer of the Brexit vote, and traffic to the site following that vote and in 2 years afterwards just did that, and we're still well above our record Brexit level of traffic. I don't have exact numbers for you, but yeah, I mean it's there's just a lot of interest.
Bit of a tangential red herring for you here, but it's Adam Taylor reminded me of it, is that one of your previous roles, was global media editor.
Yep.
And so with, yes, one hand gives you those extra subscriptions, but takes away at the same time with a hit on your advertising, probably your events businesses, etc., etc. How do you see this crisis impacting the media market generally?
At the FT specifically, or broadly?
No, broader than.
I think it's been catastrophic for the media market. I think it's accelerated. I mean, I think advertising was already in. I'm not talking about the FT. I'm talking generally about TV and that market is in serious trouble. I think the free to air broadcast market is in real trouble. The commercial free to air broadcast, ITV, has had a tough time in the pandemic. I think generally the shift away from sort of normal TV viewing patterns to streaming has accelerated, and it's just been hard. If you're a brand and you want to launch a new campaign, you're going to do it in the middle of a pandemic, and that has an attendant effect on the agencies and the the advertising creatives and media buyers that put those campaigns together. It's not pretty. I think for print newspapers too, it's been a problem. I think I'm talking generally here because I don't have exact numbers at the FT, but advertising across print, I think in the print sector, took a massive hit in the pandemic, and it's obviously has accelerated the push into digital. It's not been the happiest time in media land.
Where do you think the news business goes, and do you think there will ever be an accommodation between news businesses and big tech?
That's a good question. I don't know actually. I think there are these kind of regular overtures between big tech and publishers, and I think there are some discussions going on now from what I've sort of heard on the grapevine, but nothing that I think that would change the sort of the picture too significantly. Nothing that would throw a lifeline to smaller struggling entities. I mean, I think that the point about media is that publishers need more diversification, and if they're just a print operation with no real digital business and no subscription business, then they're in deep trouble.
Yeah. No, it's worrying times. We're talking to you who've got a robust subscription model, but we've also spoken to the likes of City AM and the Standard during lockdown, and their business models is really struggling with.
I mean, I fear for that kind of model, because if your model exists on what was predicated on giving your product and putting it in someone's hand, there's no one to put it in, no one's hands to put it in because they're all stuck at home. Then what do you do? How do you carry on selling advertising? It's a tough one.
No, exactly. Anyway, that's the end of that red herring. Let's get back to the FT, and there's a degree of serendipity in a way that you just got yourselves ensconced back in Bracken House.
Yeah.
Because it allowed you to update your systems. And because if I'd asked you perhaps this time last year, do you think you would be able to operate almost entirely remotely and put together the website and the newspaper in the way that you have? Well, I suspect I might have got a different answer to the one I'm getting today.
Yeah, well, I would have said no. I mean, I just couldn't have even conceived of it. I mean, I honestly don't know how we've done it. I mean, needs must, right? So we've done it because we had to do it. And the tech, thankfully, we're talking now, and however many people are watching, but I can call anyone I want at the paper like this and have a sort of a face-to-face conversation with them on a screen. It makes it harder than just walking over to someone's desk and looking over their shoulder at what they're looking at or editing. And I guess there's a sort of the Zoom fatigue issue, which we've written about, and I think others have experienced. When you spend all day on these calls, it does rinse you out somewhat. Yeah, I mean, newspapers are sort of collaborative enterprises, and they rely on people being able to talk to each other and spark off each other and yell at each other and, have a face-to-face conversation, speak to someone on the phone. And you take all that away, and it becomes pretty challenging.
And you also rely on talking to contacts and people out
yes.
in the wider world.
That's my fear, really. I mean, I think our reporters who were already established and who had a kind of base of contacts have been able to keep them warm and keep in touch with them and speak to them on the phone and call them like this. But for newer reporters, if I was starting out in this business and having to go out and make contacts and you couldn't get out and see anybody, I don't know how they're doing it. It's difficult. So I mean, I know from talking to some of our colleagues that some of them go for a walk in the park, get a coffee and walk around rather than sitting in an office or going for a meal. Those sorts of things are happening, but people have to get out and they have to have those interactions.
Yeah. At least they're not short of things to write about at the moment. And in your 20-year career, there can't have been a more urgent time for being at a newspaper. Is half your problem at the moment knowing where to point your resources, sift through the weight of news at the moment to find?
Yeah, it's enormous. I mean, it's. I mean, I think when we spoke about this yesterday, it sort of said it's wartime footing, and it's felt like that because we're dealing with emergencies. We're a global newspaper. This is our home market, and we have to serve it, but we also have to bring the world story to our readers here and tell our readers around the world what the issues are. So it's a daily working out the agenda every day based on the sort of strength of the stories and the whether it's what the ECB is doing with a recovery fund, or it's elections in Japan, or the Fed and interest rates, the stimulus bill last night with the US, which moved the market. Trump's crazy tweets last night about pulling out of the stimulus talks and then getting back into the stimulus talks. It's a constant hamster wheel.
Yeah, and is there anything beyond coronavirus at the moment?
It's Brexit. A little matter of Brexit we're looking forward to. That's just a small story. Yeah, we were very fortunate in that I hired a reporter called Peter Foster, who some of you will know from the Daily Telegraph, just as the sort of wall came down, or the gate was pulled up. At the start of the pandemic, he hadn't even been into the office when he became official. So he met some of his colleagues face to face for the first time a few weeks ago, and he's been with us since April. And we got him from the Telegraph, and he's some of the best sourcing and best relationships on the Brexit story of anyone around. And he's just been terrific. He's in a new job, public policy editor, so he's covering Britain. And the response to Brexit, and now the post-pandemic response, but he's also looking at the progress of the Brexit talks, the impact on customs, the impact on UK business, which is a huge story for us, and which I think we still tell better than anybody else. So we've got a very strong team, and we're lucky, I think.
Anyway, fingers crossed we get beyond this immediate sort of crunch of the pandemic, the focus on the 2020 presidential election, Brexit, but the ramifications of all these are going to be very long-lived.
Yeah.
What do you think the FT's focus is going to be in the new world, in the new environment that we come out to afterwards?
I think we do what we've always done, and we try and tell the big stories in a measured way, and break news, which is been my focus, is to break real news that our readers want to read, and which is the reason why they buy the FT. I mean, they buy the FT for our analysis and for our commentary, but they also want to know about the issues that matter to them. And these big fundamental kind of geopolitical questions have a huge bearing on the way we live, and on employment, and on our savings, and on the future of work. And I think we have to continue to use our judgment to tackle those stories, and to extract from those issues the big themes and the big concerns of our readers, and lay them out to them in a clear and concise way. I mean, it's without fear and without favor. Our old model, it's the same thing. It doesn't change.
Well, I think you've been fulfilling your brief this year about breaking news, and some of them have been huge scoops, like the Wirecard story, for example. And one of our guests this morning, here we are, Richard asked, do you think that the magnitude of the Wirecard story will encourage further whistleblower stories and a return to the kind of scoop spy journalism of that story?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, it was not easy, that story. I mean, it was 5 years in the making, and it I think another paper might have folded under the pressure, because the pressure on our journalists and our editor was extreme. We had the German regulator suing one of our reporters. We had smears against our reporters. There were private detectives following our reporters. We had a surveillance operation of our reporters. We had a guy when we were in our old headquarters, a guy on Southwark Bridge with a listening device pointed at the building, trying to listen to conversations in meetings. I mean, it was ridiculous. And we had to, Lionel Barber, former editor, was under a lot of pressure and stuck with the story and backed the reporters. I mean, it's proper old-fashioned journalism, right? And faith in journalism, and faith in reporters who are doing their jobs and doing a good job. And it was just magnificent to see it all come to fruition, because it was the biggest fraud since Enron. I mean, what a story. So yeah, I hope that the way we handled that story, and the way, and the backing that we gave our reporters, does encourage other whistleblowers, if they're out there, to share their stories, because someone has to tell those stories. Someone has to follow those up, and it was in the public interest. It's what we're all here to do.
Yeah. Matt, you gave us a good sort of overview of how the media and the FT changed in your 20 years as a journalist, but you mentioned as well that there was a new editor who started. Was it the end of last year?
Yeah, but January this year. Yeah.
January. Is there any change under Ruler's editorship?
We all know her really well, because she was the deputy under Lionel. I think she said when she started the job, evolution, not revolution, and that's been the case. She's just like Lionel, terrific, supportive. She has an eye on the global story. She cares about more than anything else, about accuracy, and about tone, and about keeping the FT in line with what its readers want and are interested in. She's been great. I mean, can you imagine starting that job, and then a month later, 2 months later, everything being thrown out the window in a global pandemic? I mean, I think she'd agree, it's been a baptism of fire for her. But I think, she's kept the place going, and she's been a credit, I think, to the paper.
Now, I'm just going through the questions here, and we've got one or two nitty-gritty ones about the PR interaction with the FT. What's your view on the Sunday for Monday stories?
Well, we still need them. It's they're probably not as we still put out a paper on a Monday, and it's on a day when there's nothing happened the day before usually. So a good Sunday for Monday is a great thing to have. I mean, they're often not the strongest. Again, you might often not get the strongest story Sunday for Monday, but they're still necessary, I think.
Do people need to start thinking about approaching you on those sort of Thursday, Friday, the week before?
I think, well, not me specifically, but I think if the contacts your colleagues here have with our reporters, I think I think you should think less about a print schedule and more about the strength of the story and how it's going to be projected.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, I mean, if, there is a global readership out there for good stories, and the stronger the story, the more projection we give it, the more people read it, the more the attendant impact.
Yeah. And is there a weekend news editor who on rotation? Or
there is. Josh Noble takes over on a minds the desk Saturday and Sunday, so we're fully staffed 7 days a week, and we obviously colleagues in Hong Kong and New York as well. So we're pretty much 24/7.
Now, here's one from Debbie. A simple question for Matthew. Matthew's email inbox must be bursting with media releases from PRs. Can he please give us some top tips on getting interest on our news releases, please?
I mean, don't send them to me as a question, because I've, as you probably just gathered, we don't. I still on lots of email lists from media days and when I was in the States. I mean, they are. How can I tell you this? You'll know from the reporters you speak to what works and what doesn't work. I think, if it's a market moving story or a release about a big company, then obviously we have to send it. I think we get sent a lot of stuff which is just flam and which is unusable. But companies doing genuinely interesting things, we're always interested in hearing about.
Yeah, and is part of that huge amount of flam that you get people trying to muscle in on comment on breaking things, or is there a place for that? And
that's not my department, thankfully. The comment you mean in terms of submitting opinion pieces?
Well, I guess there's that, and then there's also commenting on news stories. But presumably you would reply on that, on the latter half of that, that people should liaise with the necessary correspondence.
Yeah, I mean, there's, in terms of comments on understories, I mean, we have a specific team which deals with those, and we get a lot of comments, some good, some bad, some angry. I mean, there's a lot of people who specialize in sort of ranting and below the line comments on stories. In terms of commentary, and that's all produced by the opinion desk, which is run by Brooke Masters.
And one here from Harry says, has fact checking been increased?
I think, where's that, Harry? It's always been a priority to check. We haven't got rid of fact checkers. I mean, the editing process is supposed to be pretty rigorous in checking the facts in particular stories. It's not perfect, it never is, because you're dealing with fast-moving news and fast-moving information. And I think every newspaper will strive to do its best to not get things wrong, but I think that every now and then it does happen. Yeah.
And here's one question to finish off on, which I like very much. If you could do a lunch with the FT with someone right now, who would it be with and why?
Well, I spent 8 years in Los Angeles as the West Coast correspondent before I went to New York and before I came back here. And I got a lot of good lunches. So I had lunch with FT with Angelina Jolie and Larry David, who was a particular hero of mine, and various sort of directors, Dustin Hoffman, Helen Mirren. So I had a pretty good run, and a pretty good time doing those. I think here and now, Trump would be great. A colleague of mine did Trump a few years ago.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, Martin Dixon did that.
It is.
I think Boris Johnson would be an amusing lunch with the FT, an interesting lunch with the FT. Dominic Cummings would be a good lunch with the FT. Yeah, you can come up with a pretty good list.
Pizza with the FT.
Yeah.
Now, apart from anything else, I'm very much looking forward to your fantasy dinner party, which has quickly become my favourite column.
Yes.
Now, we are just conscious of the time, and we are after our half hour. But can we just quickly recap, please, about just the way in which you see the world of news changing, and the way that you see the FT trying to respond to that? Are you surprised that PRs operate the way they do in this new environment? Are they fulfilling the requirements that would help you and your colleagues?
I sometimes think that again, I haven't been a reporter for 18 months now, but it felt that towards the end of that period that they weren't, the PRs I spoke to had hang-ups about print. And as you've just heard, we're a pretty much 100% digital focused business now, and that change, that has there's an implication there for, or rather, that has an impact on, I guess, clients who want to see their stories in print, because there's something sort of tangible about being able to pick something up and say, look, we got you into the FT. There may be, it felt to me that there was a disconnect sometimes between a reporter who was trying to get the news and PRs who wanted to get a print story out of me for their client. So I think be aware of that. That would be my advice. That the reporters you're dealing with are not thinking necessarily about print. They're thinking about when projection online and when a story can be published to garner the largest possible readership of FT subscribers. That's the way we're all thinking here internally, and it would help your colleagues or people who are listening to this to understand that, and to know that that's the way what we're geared towards and what we're operating around. Because sometimes if it's like, oh, can you get this into print? Can you do this for, can we see it in print? I mean, if it's good enough, it'll get into print, but the priority here is to do the best story and get it out online.
Absolutely. And it sounds as if, just talking to you today, you are totally focused on the requirements of your subscribers, and you are not approaching it from the basis of being a journal of record.
No, and again, I mean, that's been changing for a while. I mean, I remember even 20 years ago being told we're not a paper of records. I mean, even when I started out, we would do every big company earnings story. I would do, manganese bronze and Devro, the sausage of skin maker. There's a sort of rites of passage for young FT reporters. You'd write the company earnings for Devro. Someone would do Devro every period, reporting period, and we don't do that anymore. We now go for the biggest stories, and that's just the way it is, because the largest readership is out there for the biggest stories, and not necessarily to see, sort of small companies who are probably doing a great job and are very interesting, but to see them in print if there's nothing much to say. If there's a story's good enough, then we'll always write it.
Excellent. Well, Matthew, thank you very much for your time this morning. You've given us a great insight, not just into the way the FT works, but a great insight into the shifting tectonic plates of the media, of the business agenda, and we're very grateful for sharing your time with us this morning. Hopefully we will be back on a more stable footing in the near future, and that we'll be able to live life a little bit normally in the restaurants, coffee bars, pubs, wherever. But anyway, exactly. Thank you very much. And
thank you. Hope to see you in person, some of you in person soon.
And you can see from all the comments on the right how well this has gone down with those who've joined us. So
great. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
See you soon. Bye.